everybody. We are back again. We've got what we hope is some good news and unfortunately some not so great news. The good news is, back again with our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast. We were off last week as I was down in Atlanta covering the Super Bowl. Bob LeGere was working 24/7 trying to get his unit by unit, position by position evaluations of the Bears for 2018 done. The not so good news is apparently we've added video to this podcast. And now you got to look at us too. So sorry about that. These are the faces made for radio behind the voices on this podcast. But in all seriousness, Bob, good to be back. And interesting time of the year. I think where I want to start is, a lot of griping and moaning about the Super Bowl, which I really don't understand. It was actually my 41st straight Super Bowl covering it. I thought it was one of the best games I've ever covered. It was one of the best games I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I guess a lot of that depends on what camp you come from, because I don't care if I never see another 54-51 video game again. I mean, to me, this was football. There were times when it just felt like you could hear the hitting in the press box. It was great defense. It was great coaching. There were some great individual performances. There just weren't a lot of points scored. But I know I not only do a lot of people not agree with me, I feel like I may even be on the minority in this one.
I thought it was one of the better Super Bowls I've seen recently, and only part of that is because I bet the Patriots in the under. If he had the under, it was one of the greatest games of all time, because that was never in doubt after halfway through the first quarter. But despite that, I still thought it was a good game. I agree with you. That 54-51 game, that's arena football. If I want to watch that, I'll put on tapes of old arena football games. To me, that isn't entertaining, and it really isn't football. I'll take a 13-3 game. A 10-point difference, it was a closer game than that. The outcome was in doubt until the very end. So, to me, definitely in the upper, probably 25-30% of all the Super Bowls I've seen.
Well, I think what would be interesting to a good chunk of our audience here, yes, we're Pro Football Weekly. We cover all 32 teams, but this is our Chicago Bears podcast. And the game it was probably most reminiscent of this year was the Bears-Rams game on Sunday night. I believe that was a 15-6 affair as opposed to a 13-3 job. And I think it sent a message to Bears fans that as much as they may be excited about the future of Mitch Trubisky and the offense, running the football and playing defense still wins football games, and nobody plays defense better than the Chicago Bears did in 2018. It's got to be very encouraging that what they accomplished this year, if they can continue heading north, really has them on the right track to get to a Super Bowl of their own.
Well, and you have to think, the Bears beat the Rams by 9, the Patriots beat them by 10. A Bears-Patriots Super Bowl, how good of a game would that have been? I don't know if it would have been that high scoring as 13-3, but I think one of the impressions I got from the game is that the Bears are very close to being in a Super Bowl. Like you said, there's a lot of room for growth in the offense, but the defense is there, and they're gonna have almost everybody back. So this is a team that the Bears team has been built to be there for the next several years, not just 1 year, not just a couple of great years and then fading into oblivion. This is a team that should be around for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure some folks out there are dying to point out we saw the Bears and the Patriots this year. It was 38-31, but I think that's a little misleading. Number one, it was not even yet the halfway point of the season. They had Khalil Mack and Allen Robinson, but they were both clearly limited. Mack, the best player on the team; Robinson, the most important player in the passing game other than Mitch Trubisky. And the margin of victory was actually 2 special teams touchdowns by the Patriots. So those 38 points, a little bit misleading there. We are not, or at least I am not suggesting that the Bears should have been in the Super Bowl, that they deserve to be in the Super Bowl. I think they way over-accomplished in 2018, and yet we're not at that stage yet. But I absolutely now, having watched them through that 12-5, 12-4 season and the unfortunate heartbreaking playoff loss, am convinced that if they add a couple more pieces, and a lot of these youngsters who still clearly haven't touched their ceilings yet continue to improve, that 2019 could be the year where a lot of people are picking the Bears to win the NFC North.
Well, we know the defense is going to be there, and they should be every bit as good as they were in 2018, and the offense should only get better. Mitch Trubisky won't be introducing himself to his 5 top receivers when they go to training camp. As Matt Nagy pointed out in his season-ending press conference, he won't have to tell guys where to line up when they go to OTAs and when they have, when they go to training camp. So they're worlds further than they were as far as the adapting to this offense and everybody knowing where they're supposed to go, and especially with some of the younger players, and they're going to add pieces in the offseason to this offense, I think that's a given. And I think, like I said, there's still room for improvement. Allen Robinson is a number one go-to guy. I think he'll be even better next year than he was this year as he gets further away from the torn ACL. So I think the arrow is definitely pointing up for the offense.
Well, really, I mean, I think it goes much deeper than that. I think most importantly, Mitch Trubisky is going to be a lot better. He took a quantum leap in 2018. I think he's got one more real big leap, if not as big as 18, ahead of him before we know if he can get to his ceiling or not. There is no doubt in my mind that James Daniels is going to be a better football player. If Kyle Long is healthy, that's a big plus. You've got Burton and Gabriel and Robinson adapting more to the system, as well as some of the veterans who've been here. They've re-signed Bobby Massey. Tariq Cohen is going to be better. We don't know what's going to happen running back, but I really don't see a scenario where Jordan Howard is not back and part of a tandem of some kind. There's no reason to let him go. He's in the fourth year of a rookie contract that's very favorable. They probably will add another piece there unless they trade him and get a high pick for him. So everywhere you look, they can get better on offense. And defensively, it's hard to imagine them getting better. But again, we know that Bilal Nichols and Roy Robertson Harris, if he's back, and definitely Roquan Smith, Eddie Jackson, these kids are going to be better football players as they hit their second and third seasons in the league.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that, and I think they have to be better special teams wise. They will be better regardless of who the kicker is. I think they're going to be better there. They didn't do much on kickoff returns or covering kickoff returns. They were near the bottom of the league in both of those. I think those will get better. I think they'll look for either in free agency or the draft a guy who can, if nothing else, be their number one kickoff returner, because they tried 3 or 4 guys last year and none of them really stood out. Anthony Miller was okay, not so good that you'd want to say he's the future of the kickoff return game. I think they can easily find somebody better than that in the offseason. And I think, when you're talking about one of your major needs being a kickoff returner, I think that's a team that's in pretty good shape heading forward.
I do have to tell you, though, Bob, I have very few serious gripes with Ryan Pace. I'm sorry, not Ryan Pace, but Matt Nagy. But one of them is, on the most important kickoff return of the year, which was with 58 seconds, I believe, left in the wild card game, for only the third time all year, the first time in about 10 weeks, Tariq Cohen was back there. And he made a difference. They could have won the game because of his return in large part. Why he wasn't there more often and regularly, I don't really know. I'm assuming it's because he is such a big part of the offense. He was their leading receiver in terms of catches, not yards, but his 71 receptions was the most of any Bear. But I think you've got enough talent, more than enough talent, in now Anthony Miller, along with Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel, and I think Trey Burton will get better. That to me, it would be worth it to even use Cohen a little bit less in that regard, to have him available to both return kicks and punts. He's one of the best in the league. That's where he can make the biggest impact and biggest difference for your team, or a place where he can make a huge impact and difference. I don't want to say biggest. And so if they don't find somebody else they like better back there, I would hope they'd make the move to Cohen.
Yeah, I think they just have to decide where they're going to use him. I think it was that game where he only had 4 touches. Mm-hmm. If he's only going to get 4 touches, then let him return kickoffs. If you're going to make him a key part of the offense and you're going to give him 7 or 8 carries a game and throw the ball to him 7 or 8 times, then maybe you don't want to risk him on kickoff returns. And that aspect of the game continues to be phased out every year. I think we're close to the point where they just put the ball at the 25-yard line and start play and forget about kickoffs entirely, which devalues the somebody like Tariq Cohen if you're going to use him in that role. Or he could be like the way the Steelers use Antonio Brown, sometimes putting him back on punt returns at critical junctures of games, and maybe they use him as a kickoff return in a close game or a big game, or if they're not going to use him in other facets of the game, get him back there on a couple kickoff returns.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the most important thing you can do in any industry, no matter what it is be a solid evaluator of your own strengths and weaknesses. And Tariq Cohen was voted to the Pro Bowl as a returner, a punt returner, not a kicker returner, but nonetheless a returner, because in as much open space as possible, that's where he's the most dangerous. And there's nowhere to get him more open space other than punt returns than kickoff returns. As a matter of fact, he's got more open space in kickoff returns. So I would really like to see that be his primary responsibility. Punt and kickoff returns would still leave plenty of room to use him as a specialist in the offense, and I think it upgrades the football team, but who knows? Maybe they'll get another Cohen-like returner this offseason. I know there's a lot of concern amongst Bears fans. Nobody complaining, because obviously the Khalil Mack trade was a good idea, but nonetheless a lot of concern because right now they don't have a pick until the third round of the draft. I think, Bob, one of the things a lot of people are missing, though, is that they do have 2 number 2s in 2020. One of those is the Raiders pick, so it could be very high. We'll see how much they improve this year. It is not at all unusual to be able to trade a couple number 2s to get up to number 1 in the back of the first round, or maybe trade one of those 2s in 2020 for one in 2019, along with a 5 or a 6, something like that. Ryan Pace has been as active a trader in the draft as any GM in the league since he got here, and so I think people have to stop saying, well, we don't have to worry about the draft, and realize that there's a good chance that if they identify a player or two, that they will make some moves again, and they may be picking higher than 85 or 86 or wherever that third round pick sits right now.
Well, and I think the other thing, Hub, is it's obvious that Ryan Pace has done a great job of identifying talent late in the draft. He had 2 fourth-round picks this year go to the Pro Bowl and make All-Pro. With that kind of success in the later rounds, do you need to be drafting early? Yeah, you can go, but you can go 1 or 2 years without a first-round pick, and they could trade up. I think one thing that gets overlooked is the Bobby Massey signing. It gives you one less area of need. The offensive line, as it is right now, is fine. Bobby Massey doesn't get a lot of love and doesn't get a lot of attention, but is a solid player, clearly a guy you can win with. Probably a little bit underrated, not a tremendous pass blocker, but a great guy to have in a run game. If they want to get better in the run game, which they do, at least Matt Nagy tells us that, then he's a guy that you have to have, because without him, you're auditioning guys who may be good, may be able to step in for Bobby Massey, but you don't know that. This just clears up another area of concern going into 2019.
One of the things I was not aware of, Bob, until I started talking to some of our better sources close to the club later last year, certainly Kyle Long of the offensive lineman is probably the biggest leader, but that's because of his veteran status, his multiple Pro Bowl appearances, and it is hard at times for him to lead because of all the time he's missed the last couple of years. What I didn't realize is that certain folks on that coaching staff in that front office value Bobby Massey as much for his presence in the locker room and in the meeting room as they do on the field. Apparently, he is an extremely high-character young man who always wants to do things the right way and is always keeping an eye on his teammates, making sure that they're doing things the right way as well. And that was one of the reasons they made him a priority. I think it's very interesting that he got done. And as far as we know, there's no movement right now on the other key free agents, who would be, of course, Adrian Amos, Bryce Callahan, and I think Aaron Lynch you put in that category too. What it suggests to me, the Bears do not have the cap space they've had in recent years, but they're not exactly in cap hell either. It's almost certain to me that they're going to release Deion Sims, which will free up another $6-7 million against the cap, maybe as much as $7.5 million. That would give them about $27 million in cap space because they don't have picks in the first and second round. They have to only save about $3 million for their rookies as opposed to $5 million. They can make a move or two, and I think they're probably looking at safeties and cornerbacks. This free agency group is not very good anywhere except with edge rushers and safeties. Now, the edge rushers, a lot of them are going to get tagged. You've got DeMarcus Lawrence, but he's not leaving Dallas. You got Jadeveon Clowney. They're not letting him out of Houston. Maybe D Ford moves, and it's not a great need of the Bears anyway. But then you go to these safeties. There are 5 legitimate Pro Bowl safeties who are all free agents. Now, Landon Collins is 25 years old. I think he's probably got a defensive MVP award in his future. He's not going anywhere. He says he wants to be a Giant. They've said they'll franchise him if they have to. But then you look at the next 4. Earl Thomas bothers me a little bit because he's 30 years old and he's had 2 serious injuries the last 2 seasons. But these other 3 guys, LaMarcus Joyner, Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, and HaHa Clinton Dix, again, legitimate Pro Bowl players, all of whom would be an upgrade over Adrian Amos. And if you're going to try and re-sign Amos, they're not going to cost that much more. They might be an extra $10 million against your cap over the 2 or 3 years of any deal that you did. Tyrann Mathieu in particular fascinates me. He's 27 years old. He was a legitimate all-pro, forget Pro Bowler. Now, he did have the ACL. He came back from it. He played on a 1-year, $7 million prove-it deal in Houston. You give him a 3-year deal at about $8-9 million a year, guarantee him about $18-20 million. I think that's in the ballpark he's going to be. And now you've got tremendous flexibility next to Eddie Jackson. Tyrann Mathieu is a safety who can play nickel for you, and you don't find a lot of guys like that. So I got a hunch that may be what they're thinking. That would actually answer 2 problems instead of 1, because now it covers for both Amos and Callahan. So it'd be very interesting to see just how active the Bears are in free agents. It's not going to be the last couple of years where Ryan Pace has had 3-4 big moves on the first or second day, but I think there could be 1, maybe 2 targeted moves, because there's only a couple places where that defense, it can get better everywhere, every team can, but it's only going to get more talented at Adrian Amos's position. Where else are you going to replace one of those players with something better, as a rookie or a free agent?
Well, yeah, and with that many marquee players at that position, they're not all going to get paid. So this may be an ideal situation, and it usually is, where if you wait for the first couple of days and don't feel that you need to make a big splash, which the Bears don't, coming off a 12-4 season, you wait till the second or third week of free agency, you pick off the 1 or 2 guys that are left, you get a bargain, and you probably do get an upgrade on Adrian Amos. And no rip on him. He's the kind of guy who I think is steady. He's, I think, missed 3 games in 4 years. He's always there. He's a good last line of defense. He's a good tackler. He's very effective near the line of scrimmage. And he could be one of those guys who you don't appreciate until he's gone. But like you said, if you can pick up one of these 5 guys that you mentioned, you're upgrading yourself and you're not breaking the bank. And Tyrann Mathieu is the guy who really is intriguing, because if nothing else, we know that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy both love versatility, and he's a guy who can do a lot of things for you. He's obviously not the ideal size for a safety. He's definitely undersized, but it hasn't helped him. He makes a lot of plays on the ball. You put him back there with Eddie Jackson, and I don't know that he replaces Bryce Callahan. Bryce Callahan had a great year. I think he's the guy that they prioritize as far as their free agents going forward. After that, Aaron Lynch is okay. To me, Aaron Lynch is just a guy. He's replaceable in the second or third tier of free agents, or maybe even a rookie. But, they can live without Aaron Lynch. Not that he didn't make contributions, but you look at Aaron Lynch and you think this guy has got to be an impact player, and sometimes he is, but he'll flash and then he'll disappear for 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, I don't think Aaron Lynch is critical, but he did almost once a week, a couple times twice a week, he missed a couple weeks, have 1 or 2 wow plays, impact plays. And when you've got those going on all over the field, that's a big deal. I'm not calling him a priority. He's just somebody I'd like to have back because he's been a nice fit. We have to remember you're probably getting Sam Acho back as well. Now, Sam is not the impact guy that Lynch is, but he is more dependable, more consistent, allows you to do more things. Here's my issue with Bryce Callahan. He actually had a great half a season. I think, wasn't it the last 7 games that he missed? Or was it 5 games? I can't remember.
I think Callahan was 4, but
it was at least a third of a season.
He's been hurt every year.
Exactly.
If you can keep him on the field, he's a great player.
Well, and here's the problem, is I don't think you can keep him on the field, because the reason he gets hurt is because he plays so tough and so hard, and everything you love about him is probably his biggest liability, is that he's 180 pounds, and he's out there whacking around 230-pounders, and he keeps getting hurt.
Yeah, he plays like he's 220, but he's more like 190.
I mean, these aren't freaky soft tissue injuries that you can't figure out. You know what he's doing to himself. And I'd love to have him back if I thought he was going to play 15, 16 games. I just don't know if he ever is, and I wouldn't want to break the bank on it. So, also, listen, I thought Deion Bush played pretty well when he had to step in for Eddie Jackson. Now, again, he's not going to beat anybody out. I'm not saying I want him to be the starter next to Eddie Jackson. I don't know if he showed enough for that, but if worse came to worse, you could. You got DeAndre Houston Carson's around for at least 1 more year as well. Kevin Tolliver wasn't awful. He he's not going to play in the slot. He's strictly an outside corner, but it's not like they're desperate back there. And that's the interesting thing about this football team. There's nowhere where they are particularly desperate, with the exception of place kicker. And I don't, desperate is a word you don't want to use there, but obviously for a number of reasons they can't bring Cody Parkey back. So it should be pretty interesting. It should be a lot of fun. I'll tell you the other position where I'd like to see them get more talented, Bob. Nobody's going to take Charles Leno's spot away from him. The guy went to the Pro Bowl, which I think is kind of unfortunate because he's really not a Pro Bowl tackle, and it puts a different spin on it. He isn't bad. I'm not anti Charles Leno. He's a great guy, and he plays okay. But the idea that he's a Pro Bowler, or to ignore the fact that he can't handle a speed rush to save his life, and that at least once every couple weeks, if not every week, Mr. Trubisky almost gets killed because somebody goes flying by him, that position scares me a little bit. And I'd like to at least see the next generation there at tackle. Having Brad Sowell as your swing tackle does not inspire great confidence. I know they like this Rashad Coward kid, but he's strictly a right tackle if he develops. So I do think offensive tackle is a position they have to look at. And I think tight end is a position they have to look at, because I think we agree, maybe we don't, that Deion Sims is probably gone. And Dan Brown and Ben Broniker are never going to be more than number 4s. And Adam Shaheen, it's a long, long way from Ashland College to the NFL. I always felt it was a 3-year project, but he lost a big chunk of year number 2, and when he came back, he didn't appear to have progressed at all. So I'm not writing him off. I still think he's an interesting prospect, but I think you got to add a piece there just to be comfortable that you're going to have enough. I do like Trey Burton, but to me, Trey Burton, who is an okay blocker, is strictly your move tight end. You need another guy that can be on the field 60 minutes if necessary, if Shaheen's not the guy.
Yeah, Trey Burton's not going to knock anybody off the line of scrimmage, and they're not going to ask him to. They realize what he is. He's a big wide receiver, and he'll stretch the field as a tight end. I think Shaheen, a lot like Bryce Callahan, if he could stay on the field, he could be all the things they think he is, which is big enough to block in line and athletic enough to stretch the seam and to be a red zone threat. I think he can be all those things. And like you said, he wasn't able to progress much this year because it's hard to progress when you're in a walking boot for half the season. But still has potential. I don't know that he'll ever live up to being a second-round pick, but I think he's a guy that definitely still has some upside. Charles Leno, just to get back to him for a minute, I think he's a guy a lot like Bobby Massey. He's not an outstanding guy. He shouldn't have been in the Pro Bowl. He was a replacement player in the Pro Bowl. But he's a guy that coaches love, that coaches always talk about how hard he works, his work ethic, how committed he is, how he holds everybody to a high standard, and he's prepared, and he's always wanting to know what he can do to get better. And I think, for most of his career, there were a lot of things he could do to get better. I think he's a guy you can win with. I don't think you're going to win because of him, but I think you can live with him as long as you've got a mobile quarterback like Mitch Trubisky who can escape on the 1 or 2 times a week where he's going to be running for his life.
It's interesting you went there, and I totally agree with what you just said. And it points out one of the great nuances, if you will, about the National Football League. Everything that the Bears like about Bobby Massey and Charles Leno is what they don't like about Jordan Howard. And the irony is that Jordan Howard's a really good football player. But the big problem for Jordan Howard is he's not a great practice player. He doesn't, he's not a rah-rah guy. He's not the guy who's always out there out front. He's a game player. I think we've seen that. But he struggles to ingratiate himself to coaches. And it's not that he's lazy or doesn't work hard. He worked his butt off to become a better receiver this year. But apparently, just week in and week out, they're looking for things out at practice. They're not seeing it from him, and so they're not loading him up when they get into games. I still maintain that was a mistake because I know that John Fox and Dowell Loggins felt the same way about him, but they had no choice because they didn't know how to throw the football or have anybody to do it. And you saw the kid was a Pro Bowler, So, but it's an interesting nuance of the National Football League is that sometimes the really good players are less desirable than the average guys because the average guys give you more of the effort and the mental approach that you want.
Yeah, and I think, people talk about will the Bears cut Jordan Howard? Why would they? He's a 5th-round pick still on his rookie contract. They're not paying him anything. So whether they want to bring somebody in, and I think they will draft somebody, there's some pretty good running backs who are role players probably at the next level who are going to be available in the 3rd and 4th rounds. Now, I don't know that the Bears are going to use their first pick on a running back. It wouldn't surprise me, though. There's a couple guys out there who are different enough than Jordan Howard that would fit in. They would fit in this offense, and you could still have Jordan Howard as the guy who, occasionally, when you need somebody to pound it 25 times a game, Jordan Howard can be that guy. And like you said, Jordan Howard is not a guy who is going to get anyone excited by anything he does on the field or off the field, although he did break a couple tackles this year, and he's done a better job of that in the past. But he's a very low-key guy, not a rah-rah guy at all, as you said, but can be an effective guy. I think it's obvious, and we saw it in the Super Bowl. It really helps to be able to run the ball at times.
Yeah, it does. And, we get back to free agency. It's not a great year to be looking for running backs. I know everybody wants to talk about Kareem Hunt. I have no interest in talking about Kareem Hunt. We'll see what happens if and when they finish the investigation, if and when he's been punished, if and when he's removed from the commissioner's exempt list. Apparently they could sign him, but then they couldn't have contact with him until he was off the commissioner's exempt list. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because I don't know how you can sign him without knowing if he has rehabilitated himself or what kind of young man you're getting. Matt Nagy says he knows, but I don't think that's going to be enough for Ryan Pace to make that kind of investment. What is interesting is one player who is in free agents. It's a kid that I really wanted the Bears to draft 4 years ago in the third round. They passed on him. Atlanta got him, I believe, in the fourth or maybe later in the third, and that's Tevin Coleman, who preceded Jordan Howard at Indiana. He is a pass-catching, outside-running, quicker, faster version that would fit nicely in Matt Nagy's offense. Now, I'm not saying you draft him and he's the next Todd Gurley. No, he's Tevin Coleman. But he would be the type of player that they're looking for to fit there, and to me would be a much safer signing than a Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt led the league in rushing 2 years ago, and people make a big deal about that. But when the Chiefs lost him this year, their offense didn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
They were the same Chiefs offense that averaged 35 points a game with or without Kareem Hunt. To me, he isn't worth the trouble. To me, a guy like Tevin Coleman is a guy who comes with no character concerns, and as most running backs are these days, he's not going to cost you a lot of money. He fits the mold of the guy they're looking for, who's different than Jordan Howard, who gives you a different element to your running game and passing game, a different element to your offense, and is a proven guy. He's going to come in, and there's not going to be a learning curve for him. He's a guy who, again, is a complement to Jordan Howard. He doesn't have to replace Jordan Howard, but he's used to playing in a two-back offense in Atlanta, so I think he fits in perfectly.
Yeah, I know I overuse this stat, but it is absolutely a correct stat, and I do think it tells a story. In his 3 years in the NFL, there are only two running backs in the league with more rushing yards than Jordan Howard, and that is Todd Gurley and Ezekiel Elliott. Kareem Hunt doesn't give you any more than Jordan Howard. He's just a different style, a different fit for what Matt Nagy wants to do. Now, the idea that he's going to do more here than he did in Kansas City is kind of silly, because at this point, this offense hasn't quite gotten as good as Kansas City's yet. So, I mean, to me, the Kareem Hunt thing is just an overreaction to a lot of things. Yeah, he did lead the league in rushing. He'd be a nice extra piece if you had him and Howard together. See, I think what they need, Benny Cunningham is a free agent. I like Benny Cunningham. He's a nice special teams player. He's not really a third down back. The guy who should be your third down back is Tariq Cohen. And yes, you could use him at receiver on first or second down, but I think as your primary returner, as your primary third down back in that Darren Sproles role, that's what Tariq Cohen is built for. And what the Bears need is another back to pair with Jordan Howard, who is capable of 20, 25 touches a game if that was what you wanted to do. And then, depending on the week, you decide if one of them gets the 20 touches, the other one gets 10, or maybe you're always trying to get them both 15. That's what the Rams actually did with Todd Gurley and C.J. Anderson. If you can do that with Todd Gurley, you can do it with anybody. So that's why I think, and by the way, that's what the Falcons did with Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman. So, just one possibility out there. Bob, we're going to talk a little bit more about the coming season, about free agency and the draft. We do want to first, however, take a quick break for our sponsors. Short intermission. We're near the end, but we'll be back with some final thoughts after we give you a chance to hear from our sponsors. everybody, to this week's edition of our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast. I'm Hub Arkush along with Bob LeGere. We've only got a few minutes left here. I was a little late getting to the break there, but we do want to thank our great sponsors. We also want to thank our executive producer, Dan Mott, who puts all this stuff together for us. And look what he went and did. He gave you moving pictures, too. So if you're not looking, this is now a video and audio podcast. You can watch us as well as hear us if you like. Just go to profootballweekly.com. You'll find the instructions, or you can go to iTunes and download a subscription. It's real easy to use, and we do hope you'll enjoy it. So, Bob, we're going to wrap this one up in a couple minutes. I think a couple other things to look at with the Bears for the coming off season. The announcement has been made. They will be playing a game in Britain this year. I don't know if it's necessarily London. They're using a couple different stadiums. Unfortunately, I have to ask all of you Bears fans who keep texting me and emailing me and tweeting at me every day when it is so you can make your plans. We don't know. And we're not going to know until sometime in April, okay? They usually announce those a couple weeks early. It will be somewhere between week 4 and week 9, week 5 and week 10, something like that. That's where they pack all these games in. We can tell you who all the Bears' opponents are this coming season, but the schedule will not be out until mid-April. So as much as we know you're looking forward to maybe making the trip, not only getting to see the Bears, but getting to see London, getting to see England, maybe you throw in a quick trip on the Channel over to Paris or somewhere else. We hope you enjoy it. We'll let you know just as soon as everybody else does exactly what the dates are going to be for that. One thing that is interesting to me, Bob, is that the schedule last year, we didn't talk a lot about it. There was no point in talking about it because coming into the season, the Bears were a 5-11 team. What difference did it make how weak the schedule was? But now on the other end at 12-4, the stats are the stats. They did play the easiest schedule in the NFL. Now, what that means is the combined win-loss record of their opponents had the lowest winning percentage of any of the other 31 teams. That doesn't mean that the Rams win was any less impressive, that the Vikings games weren't tough, that the Patriots game wasn't tough. But it's going to get a lot tougher this year. With the first place schedule, it means that they will have games against the New Orleans Saints, against the Los Angeles Rams, against the Dallas Cowboys, and because they get the NFC West this year, they're also going to get both the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. Nobody is going to be questioning that schedule this coming season. Plug in 2 with the Vikings, plug in 2 with the Packers. I think the Packers will be better this year. I don't know if they'll be all the way back. I don't like looking at these schedules until you get to week 4, week 5 of the season because these teams change so much from year to year. But I don't think there's a chance that all those playoff teams are suddenly going to have bad seasons. That's why I know I have said on multiple occasions, I expect the Bears to be a better team in 19 than they were in 18, but probably not to win more than 10 or 11 games. I think they'll be hard-pressed to go 12-4 again.
Yeah, I would agree. They could be better and have a worse record, and the schedule will definitely be tougher. How much tougher, we don't know. It's definitely tougher on paper, but how it plays out, that remains to be seen. I think the Packers will be better, as you said. I think they still have a lot of holes, and I don't think they're going to be able to fill them all in one off season. The Vikings, if you look at their roster, it's tremendously talented, but they didn't get the production out of a lot of players they thought they were going to get. The Lions, to me, are still several players away from competing with the Bears. So, I see them having success again in the division. As far as outside the division with the schedule they're playing, I think on paper, 10-6 next year would be a great season.
Yeah, I don't worry about playing Chucky's Raiders, but I think even the trip to Denver to visit Vic Fangio, depending on what pieces they add, could get interesting. I believe they're also going to get, I don't know about the Panthers. I'm trying to remember exactly how that works out. Actually, they get the Eagles again. I think they get the entire NFC East. So it'll be fun. It's going to be a very challenging schedule. Bob, we're going to try and visit with everybody every week this offseason. There will be some holes in that schedule. We will be back next week. I know you're going to be out on vacation the week after. We'll probably try and get Arthur Eric to sit in for you then. We're going to have to take a little time out. Well, actually, maybe we'll do one from the Combine because Mr. Mott will be there producing with us. And that's the next big event. It's hard to believe. The Super Bowl seems like it was yesterday. It's already, a week in the rearview mirror, and now the Combine is literally just 2.5, 3 weeks away, the next big event on the NFL calendar. And as I pointed out near the top, the fact that right now the Bears don't have a pick in the first or second round doesn't mean they're going to take this any less seriously, that they're not going to be scouting every single one of these players, and we'll be there as well to keep our listeners up to speed. I think that as the Bears head to the Combine, you're not going to worry too much about place kickers at the Combine. So I would guess that the focus is going to be at cornerback and safety and maybe some depth on that offensive line. Maybe not a bad year for tight ends. We're putting the Pro Football Weekly draft guide to bed literally as we speak. And one thing that I didn't realize is I didn't think it was a great year for tight ends, but we've actually got about half a dozen guys rated in the first couple rounds, and that could be something the Bears address as well.
Yeah, I could see them going tight end, but and not that it's a crying need, but I think they'll take a running back early for them, but that means third, fourth, fifth round, somewhere in there. I wouldn't be surprised to see them use their first pick on a running back if the right guy is there. But you mentioned how much work they're doing, probably more, because they know they don't have the top two picks. And yeah, there's not the pressure of missing on a first or a second round pick, but they still have needs. They don't have as many picks to do it. And there's always the possibility, as we mentioned earlier, that they could still trade up into if not necessarily the first round, maybe into the second round by using some of their draft capital from next year.
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at the running backs. The last couple of years have been outstanding years to draft running backs. There's been great talent in the first or second round. There's a very good chance that there won't be a first-round running back this year. Maybe the Jacobs kid from Alabama, maybe Montgomery from Iowa State sneak into the bottom of the first round. But I think it's more likely that those guys are high to middle second-rounders, and there's a very good chance that the third, fourth, fifth best back in this draft could still be sitting there even if the Bears don't make a move prior to where their pick is. And so there is going to be a run on running backs, no pun intended, in the third round. That's where a lot of the top talent is falling this year, and so I think that's a very reasonable projection to say that first pick, if they stand pat, if they sit still, it could very well be a running back somewhere in the mid or late 80s, wherever they're at in that third round.
Yeah, and the other area I could see them addressing is defensive line, which is very deep. I think, I don't know if it's our Greg Gabriel or one of the other draft prognosticators had 7 defensive tackles going in the first round. There is some depth to. It's not, you can get a great one in the first round, but you can also wait a little bit and get a guy that you can plug and at least play in a rotation. Now, the Bears had 3 guys they played on the right side, Jonathan Bullard, Roy Robertson-Harris, and Bilal Nichols. Nichols should only get better. The other 2 guys are both young enough that they still have upside. So that's a position where maybe those 3 guys together could equal one great player, or maybe Bilal Nichols takes another step and becomes the guy this year.
I think Roy Robertson-Harris showed enough to say that he has the ability to develop into a guy you can't afford to take off the field. I mean, he really took a big step this year. He is going to be a restricted free agent. My hope is that he will be back. If any of them, Bullard, who was the highest pick, the third-round pick originally, probably has failed to develop the most. It is a great year at that position. I just wonder with the amount of depth they already have, because of course you got Eddie Goldman manning the nose, and realistically, Akeem Hicks is a defensive tackle. They all are in a 3-4 defense. But you're right, it is a great year for talent there. There's some really good edge rushers as well, and the second wave of those guys. And if you don't bring back Aaron Lynch, if you're not convinced, Leonard Floyd had an outstanding second half of the season. I think he became a great all-purpose linebacker. But we still don't know if he's ever going to be a double-digit sack guy. And if he's not, you probably do need another edge rusher, another quality pass rusher. I didn't see anything from Kylie Fitz that screamed to me that he's got a big leap to make. I think Isaiah Irving is the more interesting kid, and for some reason they don't let him get on the field all that much.
Well, I agree with you on Roy Robertson-Harris, although if you look at the numbers, not great production this year, and played about the same amount of snaps as Bilal Nichols. But getting off the bus, Roy Robertson-Harris looks like a beast. You look at that guy and you think, how can this guy not be a great player? And maybe he will be. He's been slow to develop, but I think there's some upside there. He grew from an outside linebacker to a defensive end in a matter of about a year and a half, went from, I think, 263 to 298. and still is ripped. So this guy looks like he should be a player and is still young enough that he could be.
I'll tell you what's interesting about him, though, Bobby. Go back and look at those numbers. What you're going to see, he was making a couple, sometimes even 3 wow plays a week till about midseason or so. And just about the time that Bilal Nichols really started to come on, he started to be a little less visible. And I think a lot of that was them kind of sharing that spot and sharing that spotlight. But we've got all spring, winter, well, let me get them in order, all late winter, spring, and summer to evaluate and analyze all this. Right now, we're going to have to say goodbye. We're already going a little overtime on this edition of our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast. We owed you one. We weren't here last week, so we did an extra few minutes. We'll be back again next week, but for now, we want to thank you all very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Again, our thanks to Dan Mott for making this all possible, and we will talk to you again next week right here on our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast.